Hi, and welcome to the Gist with Joe. Today I'm here with Paul VanderKlay. Paul VanderKlay is the pastor of the Living Stones Christian Reformed Church in Sacramento, California. Paul is active on YouTube with a channel having approximately 24,000 followers. Paul's YouTube channel started by commenting on the Jordan Peterson phenomena. However, it's grown far from that. Paul's producing videos on subjects such as the nature of reality, consciousness, cognition, and of course, commentaries on biblical books. Paul is also active in his rando conversations, which he has with interesting people really throughout the world. Paul's also a key player on the online community called and dubbed This Little Corner of the Internet. So I would like everyone to welcome with me Paul VanderKlay. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing well, Joe. How are you doing?
Awesome. I'm good. I'm good. So, Paul, we talked about this. Very eclectic in your approach. Like I said in my intro, you started off commenting on this Jordan Peterson phenomena, but now you really launched out from there. And now you're having your own little side projects. Although I'm very unfortunate that I couldn't attend. You even, in September, had the opportunity with some of your colleagues, such as Jonathan Pajot and John Vervaeke, to do the Thunder Bay Conference, which probably really, I think, is a very large step for what your project is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, very eclectic in approach. Also, you have your conversations with randos, as you call them. So I'm curious, could you explain what's the gist of your project? What's the vision that you have with doing all this? Is there a through line? And really, at the end of the day, what could you summarize as what you're trying to get done here with your YouTube evangelization, if you will?
You're right that it's not an easy thing to sort of pull together. Perhaps one way to approach it would be I grew up in the Dutch Calvinist tradition that sort of centers around Calvin College, Calvin University, which sort of follows the neo-reformed movement in the Netherlands around the turn of the 19th, 20th century. And Abram Kuyper, one of the lights of that movement, declared that there's not one square inch over which Christ does not declare, "This is mine." And I think that in some ways contributes to the eclectic nature. I think part of my eclectic nature is just my ADHD. I'm interested in a lot of things, and I'm curious, and so I try to explore them. And so on one hand, it's the biblical vision of, in the book of Colossians, for example, Christ sort of conquers all and then turns it over to the Father. And now that conquering, though, so when I was in college, my father's a Christian minister. I went to Calvin College, but college was at least far enough away from the family that at Calvin College too, they had a degree of liberty about it, where chapel wasn't compulsory. There was no compulsory Sunday worship service, anything like that. So when you go to college, a lot of CRC kids would have their own large and small revolts. And so, when I was in college, my first couple of years, I did a lot of thinking about, well, do I want to be a Christian? Is this the thing I actually want to do? Or is this just something that I was raised in and they'll just kind of keep following along with? And one of the things that I noted was I began to sort of read the Bible on my own and think about it, especially the Gospels. And I found Jesus very, not like I would, if someone only watched, let's say, evangelical evangelists and never read the Gospels, who they imagine Jesus might be would be a very different picture than the Jesus you find in the Gospels. Because Jesus would interact with all sorts of people who were, much later I would develop the language for a lot of these observations. He'd meet all sorts of people who were maybe not at the center of what was, let's say, the area of concern for the Pharisees and the Pharisees in first century Judea or Palestine, who were very determined to rid God's holy land and God's holy people of the pagan imperial Romans. And for that reason, the the Pharisees very much wanted to get people to abide by all of this virtue signaling, in a sense, that demonstrated that they were on God's side against the Romans.
Right.
The Pharisees were sort of fighting a culture war. The Essenes went out into the desert. The Zealots were knifing Romans. So
Yeah.
they have this whole spectrum, which you can, I think, probably continue to see. And then
Yeah.
Jesus talks to sinners. And, for example, when Jesus is heading to Jerusalem to his death, he passes through Jericho. And you would imagine that the elders of the city of Jericho were probably hoping that this very popular strange rabbi would get a chance to host him and extend hospitality to him and have them in probably the best house that they could find and have a banquet and get a chance to ask him questions, sort of like if Jordan Peterson was coming to your let's say coming to your Catholic church, that you'd say, I'll put Jordan Peterson up, and my family will come and
Right.
we'll put our best meal out for him. And Jesus basically gets to the city and says, no, I'm just passing through. But then, of course, Zacchaeus, a tax collector, climbs a tree to see Jesus, and Jesus stops and says, no, change of plans. I'm staying overnight, and I'm staying at his house. And that, the Gospel of Luke has this strong theme that you see in the parable of the prodigal son, of Jesus coming to seek and save the lost. But and so you don't find Jesus either as a quivering mass of availability that is just trying to please everyone. He's certainly not like that. But he is engaging. I mean, he's doing plenty of talking to across the religious political spectrum. He is talking to the Pharisees, and you will find him in the home of Pharisees, engaging them over issues. But he's also in the home of sinners like Zacchaeus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so understanding that aspect of the gospel, and sort of Abraham Kuyper's vision of all of life belongs to our creator God, and Jesus comes to redeem and reclaim this. Well, what's the process by doing this? And for me, the process that probably fits me best is talking to people. And one of the things that I like very
You're
quickly,
good at that.
well, yeah, I mean, you and I are both talkers. We learned that in your randos conversation. You went for about half an hour, 45 minutes straight, and I've got no problem with that. But we're both kind of talkers in that way. And one of the things that I also saw growing up, so my father was a pastor in Paterson, New Jersey, a little poor community, a little poor church. And one of the things that you discover is that God spreads his riches down into the most surprising places. And the way the hierarchies of this world work is we're all going to pay attention to really smart people like Jordan Peterson or really rich people like Elon Musk. But all around the world are really very amazing people. Some of them are Christian, some of them are not Christian. And they've got a lot to contribute to the conversation. And so when I started doing commentaries on Jordan Peterson, I started getting emails from people, and then people wanted to talk. And then sometimes I would record the conversation because they'd want to remember, what did you say to me? And I was like, well, if you just hit the dumb record button, then you'll have a record of it, and you can go and look it up if you want to revisit it. And then I had the idea, because I was starting to get repeat questions, of sharing the talks. And that started a whole thing of, some people, of course, some people want to have the conversation. Some people want to have it publicly, because in this world of these strange black mirrors, there is a degree of validation to be seen in the community having a conversation. And I thought, wow, there are so many interesting people out there and so many interesting stories. I think it serves the world, and I think it serves Christ to share them. And so I started sharing these randos conversations, and it's really been a good thing. So that's a big part of my channel. Another part of my channel is just that I am interested in a lot of things, and it helps me to sort of think and talk out loud. And I was
Yeah,
doing that through blogging for a while, which was fine, and it was a good discipline. But then when I started my channel, I realized that if I do this on YouTube, people will talk back to me in the comment section on a Discord server. They make their own little videos, or they start their own channel. Or now sometimes we do these StreamYard things where we're
sure.
just chatting. And then I started local groups called Estuary,
Right.
or local conversation groups, because, and this is one of the things that I think Peterson really helped bring to light, is that we do our thinking together,
Yeah.
and together we're smarter than we are alone. And so if you can actually facilitate conversation, and it's, even especially across lines, across battlefields. I mean, not the Protestant Catholic battlefield is not like it was 50, 75 years ago, which I
Right.
think is wonderful that it's a whole lot better now. But if we can have Roman Catholics and Protestants talk, and talk with Orthodox, and talk with skeptics, and talk with
Sure.
atheists, and talk with Jews, and talk with Muslims, if we can do all that conversation, we can probably all figure out how to live better in this world together and more productively. So why not make some contributions in that area too? And so the channel's been sort of a hodgepodge of all of these things.
Yeah. No, but it's a good hodgepodge, and I like what you said about. Well, I like the sentiment that you're expressing here. With this is a Christ-filled mission, and I'm from what I'm hearing is like one way that you are bringing Christ into the world is through conversation.
Yeah.
And so if this conversation can be centered either explicitly or even just kind of intrinsically in Christ, and that's something that I think that it sounds like you would probably be happy about that, right?
Yes, yes. And so then when you look at all of just read the Gospels, like Jesus' conversation with the Syrophoenician woman, which is a very controversial conversation, because she has a daughter that needs healing, and she comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, is it right to feed basically the bread of God to the dogs? And so Jesus, don't say things like that.
What are you
And of
doing,
course,
Jesus?
then of course, but the woman doesn't just run to her friends and say Jesus is a bigot. The
Sure.
woman comes right back at him and
Yeah.
says, yeah, but even the little good dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And of course, then Jesus heals her daughter.
Yeah, there
And
you go.
and that kind of, I mean, you come from an Italian Catholic family. In my experience, Italian Catholics, not wallflowers.
No, not at all.
So her
That's great.
spirit of not taking offense and playing the victim, and going
Yeah.
to her own little group, and we're gonna start rumors that Jesus is a bigot and we don't
Yeah.
like him anymore. No, she goes right back at him,
Yeah, you're
and
gonna do it
Jesus
right
is
at
like,
that table.
yeah.
Right
and,
there.
and you see that in the Psalms too. It's you don't find, I mean, what if the Jews had all their grievances and they just sort of quietly deconstructed in bitterness and anger? No, they go right back at God,
Yeah.
and they say, hey, wait a minute, where are you? Read the book of Habakkuk. I just preached on that recently. You know, Lord, look at your people. It's the idolatry and the injustice. And God says, okay, I'll fix that. I'll send the Babylonians. And like, you're going to fix idolatry and injustice with the Babylonians? And this is the way the Bible is, and I think the people of God should learn from this.
Yeah, it's a good vision of maybe how we should be acting right now. We talked about that in the randos conversation for a little bit. You can have confrontation, you can have disagreement, right? Paul, we could have a 8-hour dialogue right now about the differences between my Roman Catholicism and your Protestantism. However, we're not. And we know the differences. We're aware of the differences. The differences can and should be stated from time to time. However, as you said, I mean, this is where the Holy Spirit is working in conversations like this, and in conversations that I see on your channel a lot. And yeah, I mean, that's I think one of the reasons why you're such an interesting figure. Now, I'm also curious. So there's Paul VanderKlay, right? The pastor who's in Sacramento, who's making cool YouTube videos, who's talking to cool people. Then there's this Paul VanderKlay that transcends, right? And Paul VanderKlay, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, and correct me if you don't even want this title. Maybe spearheader, one of the spearheaders of what many people call this little corner of the internet. So then you have that, and I'm sure that to a degree, it's a similar project, but I'm sure maybe at times you've maybe like looked back and said, "Oh, are these meshing with one another?" And so, but you're shaking your head yes. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that before I really get into my question.
Well, there's a lot of people who have that question
Sure.
because there are people who, have questions. Well, this estuary project of yours, is there a clear gospel presentation every time you have an estuary meeting? And my answer is probably not.
Right.
You're hanging out with, let's say if you're a real hardline Protestant, you're talking to an icon carver. Didn't we destroy icons
Sure.
in the 16th and
Right.
17th century for a
Wasn't that our
reason?
MO? Yeah.
That's right. That's what Protestant is, right?
Yeah.
Or you're talking to John Vervaeke, who, was teaching a class on Buddhism and cognitive science, and
Sure.
he's a non-theist, and he's talking about Neoplatonism. And you're identifying, aren't you afraid that you're going to be a vector for all kinds of things that aren't, that aren't really in line necessarily with Christ and his mission? That's a question I get.
Oh, of course. And with that, I want you to speak on the behalf of TLC. So I ask you, what's the gist of your project? Okay. Now, and I know you've gotten this like I did my homework and I've been on your channel and even before now, right? I'm fairly active in your channel and I know that what the conversations are about. You've been talking. I can even remember a conversation that you had in October. You've been talking a lot about on-ramping. So you said, I think you said something along the lines of, how do you introduce the gist to someone new? Because this can't be just this like isolatory group, right? Because that there's also something that would be dangerous in that if it's just if this is just going to be if we're going to be an isolationist nation essentially, well then are we actually doing what you said before and getting the word of God out there through conversation? So could you describe, and I don't even know if it would be your responsibility, what would be the gist? What's the gist of the project of TLC
I
currently?
think it,
Even how about that?
I think it's trying to have honest conversations about difficult subjects. And in that way, part of why Jordan Peterson made such a big splash was he was willing to say things that were politically incorrect, but a whole lot of people knew. And then he would engage in a lot of these. He would engage in a lot of these questions and controversies honestly. It doesn't mean he had to get everything right, but
Yeah.
there was a give and take in that. And so then, I was making videos about Jordan Peterson, and people say, well, there's this Jonathan Peugeot out there. He's an Orthodox icon carver. You should
Yeah.
talk to him. And it's like, okay. So then I talked with Jonathan, and I learned more of his story and everything. And then people were like, well, there's this colleague of Jordan's, John Vervaeke, out there. And, I watched some of his early Buddhism and cognitive science classes he was doing, and the audio quality was terrible, but his ideas were interesting. And then go talk to him. And then I discover, he grew up in a little fundamentalist community in Canada and is rather wounded by it. And that put him on a spiritual journey to a lot of interesting places. And I also discovered, the more I talked to him, that he was an incredibly interesting and generous conversation partner and
Yeah.
a great many things. He's also courageous. And so that spirit of daring to talk about difficult things. And again, I see that in Jesus. In Luke 15, Jesus says, basically confronts the a little bit of the cancel culture in in that culture war that says, Jesus, you shouldn't talk to tax collectors because they're basically turncoats who are letting down the cause. And Jesus says, no, I will. And I'm going to talk to them in a way that hopefully brings them back to God. And the whole parable of the prodigal son, I really love Kenneth Bailey's enlightening of that parable, because he enlightens the fact that in a small Jewish community at that point, there'd be tremendous pressure on the father to not let the younger son, the prodigal son, back, because he's an enemy of the community and he damaged the community, and all that is true. And the father basically says, I don't care. He's my son. And the older brother is the one who gives voice to that, says, I've been faithful to you the whole time, and you've not even given me a goat, but for this worthless piece of crap, you killed the fattened calf. And the father says, I want my sons together. This is the heart of God. And so in this little corner, I see a space to do that. And so you're exactly right. If to the degree that this little corner gets insular, that's a problem. But openness is it's a difficult thing to maintain without either just endemic, conflict going on inside, or just becoming formless. And so that's a difficult tension to continue to try to hold.
It's a hard thing. It's like, how many hens can you allow in the coop? And then the opposite of that is, how free form can this be?
Right.
And so maybe it sounds like what you and your colleagues were doing at Thunder Bay was maybe this step into bringing this internet word out into flesh, having physical contact with one another, making this present, having people come to this physical location. And then what they can do is they can go back to their respective communities and say, hey, listen what I learned. Also, great place of having it, Thunder Bay. It sounds like a mythical place. So, kudos to all you there.
Another Great Lakes city.
Exactly. I know. So, it sounds like you're doing that. It sounds like you did that with Thunder Bay. And I'm curious if you have either heard or, any of what's the results of Thunder Bay? What's your plan for doing things Thunder Bay-esque in the future? Is this a route that you plan on pursuing more? Is there a future for this? And I'm just curious, if you know of it, could you share a little bit?
Yeah, it is very much, we want Thunder Bay to be typical and possibly archetypal in terms of this. Because again, before there was Thunder Bay, so John Vervaeke is he's a cognitive scientist. And so in many ways, he's pursuing his cognitive science, and he's pursuing his Silk Road religion that's not a religion. He's pursuing that aspect of it. Jonathan Peugeot has his symbolic world. And so he's been pursuing that. I'm a pastor. And so part of what
there's an interesting difference between the three of you.
Yes.
Go on.
So one of the things that I tried to that I've been trying to both model and encourage is what I call estuary groups.
Right.
Because so there's two things. Like I said, the tensions about doing this very difficult thing, about allowing a lot of openness, but not having it, say, either devolve into feuding or just kind of squish into gelatin. Is there needs to be scale. There needs to be small communities. There need to be personal relationships, because in many ways, the personal relationships are sort of the fiber that keep it from devolving into gelatin.
Of course.
And so you want there to be events like Thunder Bay that people can go to for something really special. To participate with some of the people that they see on screen, but most of all, to meet other people who are interested in what they're interested in, to build those relationships. But then also you want to encourage them when they go back home. And this is something that I've been encouraging churches and pastors to consider, is hosting an estuary group. Now, estuary groups are not evangelistic per se.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that evangelism can't happen in that context. I see estuary groups as much more pastoral care, because it's pastoral conversations that I am having with people, but more at scale.
Sure.
So I think there has to be sort of a local component to this. It's sort of like the fact that, and I'm sure you've met many Catholics who don't go to church.
That's every Catholic. I'm kidding. It's a cultural thing, Paul. Get it right. Okay.
But and it's, so you can sort of be a Catholic,
That's right.
but what real Catholics will tell you is, unless you're actually going to mass, unless you're actually, in a parish, unless you actually have a priest, you're not really Catholic. You're sort of out there.
Yeah.
But so you really need both the big, sort of the upper level, but you also need the local practice and the local relationships.
Now help me fill in the gap here then, because I agree with you 100%, but I'm just curious about something. Okay, so and the estuary groups, beautiful idea. We also have been having a conversation. A lot of our conversation for the last couple hours has been maybe revolved around, do we need to, well, can we let the frustrations across denominations go to have a conversation with one another? So do these estuary groups need to be, do the Protestants just need to have their own group? Do the Orthodox have a group? Or can we create an estuary group of Roman Catholics, of Methodists, of of a Ruthenian, of a Eastern Orthodox? Can we do that? Is because it sounds like, well, that should be part of the mission, no? I mean, if we want to have a conversation with one another to get things done, and to get things done means to proclaim and live out the word of Christ, shouldn't we be, coming together cross-denominationally? Or are the estuaries just, hey, I'm going to have an estuary at this particular church of this particular denomination, and we're not going to talk to each other? So like, for example, Cleveland is a mid-major city. So in reality, I'm sure we could create spaces where you have cross-denominational estuary groups. But is that not the vision?
Well, first of all an estuary group is a group that uses this estuary protocol, which is basically just a tool that sort of helps the group in the meeting have the conversation that the people in the room want to have, and not let any one person hijack it or control it, or not let sort of an outside agenda colonize the group. So that tool is just a simple conversational tool.
Awesome.
I always think of estuary as church adjacent.
Got it.
It might be happening within the grounds of a church or something like that, but mentally it's church adjacent. Jonathan Pajot once said it's sort of like the narthex, in that this is a place where you may be Catholic, you may not be Catholic. Maybe you just saw this really cool building and kind of want to peek your head in and take a look to see, oh, there's a crucifix and there's stained glass and there's candles. And so in a lot of estuary groups right now just sort of use meetup.com, which really keeps things eclectic, because there are some people that are just looking for some place on a Wednesday night that will let them sit down and have a conversation. So they don't know who I am. They don't know anything about this little corner. They know nothing about that. They show up at the estuary meeting and we're just going to have a conversation, and it's going to be about whatever the group, the little, or the subgroup, because you have 6 or 8, whatever the little subgroup wants to talk about. But in that time, then you get a chance to know and be known, and perhaps love and be loved. And then as a Christian minister, churches, so there's St. Anthony's right down the road here, and every year they have a bazaar or a festival or something, and churches of all stripes do this, and they'll sell hot dogs, and you have little booths and maybe a raffle, and who knows what you're going to do. And part of the idea in the mind of the church is we want to sort of lower the boundaries, get to know our community, serve our community. And I've done how many different kinds of things like that over the years, and out of these things get very, very little evangelistic or pastoral relationships out of it,
Yeah.
because they're
No,
here for a trunk or
makes sense.
treat or something like that. With an estuary group,
Yeah.
it's smaller. I'm not gathering hundreds of people. It's smaller. It's only dozens of people, perhaps in my case. But we're beginning a relationship. We're
Yeah.
getting to know each other, and people are coming and they're able to say, this is who I am and this is what I think. I don't believe any of this church stuff.
Right.
Okay. I'm glad to know that about you. To not know that about you doesn't help any of us. So
Yeah. And then it sounds like the micro then, spills in, feeds into the macro. And then again, that goes back to this Thunder Bay idea.
yep.
And then we have these large conferences and we could say what we want to say. We could talk about what a common theme of these groups have been and feed into it that way. I think that's really cool.
So part of what's been happening, so myself, John Van Donk, he's been helping me work on this. We've been starting these estuary groups. I went to Europe to kind of help groups start because, of course, because of my YouTube channel, I have a little bit of visibility. So if I go someplace, more people will come than if they just do something on meetup.com. But then what we also noticed is that in time, either an estuary group or a few estuary groups will get together and say, in a city, and they'd say, we'd like to host an event. And
Yeah.
I'd say, great, host an event, figure out how to do it. And Thunder Bay was an example of this, even though they didn't have an estuary group on the ground. They had Urban Abbey, which is in some ways sort of a similar idea. Southern California in May, we're planning another event where Vervaeke and Peugeot and I will all be there. I know the Chicago group has, for a couple of years, had some small events. I was at their last one. They want to start doing some of this. Ireland in a Catholic priory. We had an event last year, and I know Marcus.
Right.
He's an Irish Catholic. He'd like to host some of these. Germany's been running a festival, so what happened at Thunder Bay is starting to happen in a number of places. And as Sam, who's an important person in the Chicago estuary, he's looking at this and saying, in a lot of ways, what we have going on in this little corner of the internet could probably do a lot better than, let's say, Pangburn, who sort of did the Peterson Harris things.
Yes.
But Pangburn sort of collapsed by his own either greed or incompetence. We're not quite sure. But having communities that have this value of what Vervaeke calls dialogos,
right.
What I described, this is actually a great way to facilitate the kinds of conversations that church institutions and even universities are sort of unable to sort of pull off right now.
They can't do it. Simply put, they can't have those conversations.
And we seem to be able to, at least so far.
So I want to go back to Paul VanderKlay, the man then, who, is his own person and doing his own mission. Now, I've been curious about this. So it almost seems like they have each other on retainer, Peugeot and Peterson and Vervaeke. Like, oh, hey, I just imagine them calling each other up. Hey, come on my channel today. Okay.
Yeah.
What's your do you have any hopes with that? Like, for your future, what's your vision for your own personal future? So it's weird because you do have these adjacent relationships, and you're just like a separation, a 1 degree of separation from Jordan Peterson. But correct me if I'm wrong. How many conversations that you've posted that you've had with Peterson?
Well, I've had one online conversation with Jordan.
So I've always been curious. It's like, listen, you're working very close with Vervaeke, you're working very close with Peugeot. Do you have any aspirations I'm putting this as a joke, but like to be on retainer? What's your aspirations with that? Yeah, because I think that you would have something important to say. You're on the same. I view you as the same. You're of the same weight class, I think, as Peugeot and as Vervaeke. So, yeah, what's your aspirations with that? Do you want to get to that level?
That's complicated in
Sure.
that part of. So my project is a little different from John and Jonathan's, and rate of growth is important in trying to develop communities. What happened with Jordan, I often call it a status rocket. He went up so far and so fast.
So fast.
He lost his, and probably terminally, he can never once again be a local clinical psychologist, which is a real
No,
loss because
probably not.
from what I've heard, he was a terrific one. He can no longer be sort of the university professor he was. And again, he was a terrific university professor. So now he's sort of a public intellectual, YouTuber, podcaster, social, culture warrior. And I don't want that for me.
Okay.
So to suddenly be super famous, super fast, I think that'd be kind of destructive in Paul VanderKlay's life.
Okay.
I'm a pastor of a small church that is struggling. If suddenly I had, so in the church I went to in college, when I started going to that church, they had like 200 people there on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
When I stopped going to that church, they had like 1,000, 1,200 people there on a Sunday morning.
Wow.
The group of people that really hated that rate of growth, the 200 people that were there to begin with.
Right.
Because churches are communities.
Yeah.
And to suddenly be flooded and overwhelmed with, we can't take 1 million new randos next month. That would, in a sense, swamp the estuary. That would be like a tsunami. And I don't know much about estuary biology, but I suspect a fully functioning estuary, if it gets inundated by a tsunami, will likely need a period of recovery until normal productive estuary functions can resume.
Yeah.
So whereas I think Jordan and I are going to have a conversation at some point in the future online again. We've had very short conversations offline. He knows who I am, and I think that will happen at some point. But I'm comfortable waiting because when I first started talking about estuary and we had a degree of lift, there was a lot of interest in, around me of sort of starting a not-for-profit corporation and getting big. And people got frustrated with me because I said, I'm not starting Estuary Inc. I'm not starting a monolith.
Heard you say that before. Yeah.
I would rather facilitate a movement than necessarily a big monolithic institution. And so, if Jordan's got my email. He emails me and messages me when he wants to reach out to me.
Sure.
So when he wants to do something, I'm available.
That's awesome.
I'll let the Daily Wire crew in, and they can talk to me. That's all right.
Come on in, Ben. That's what you'll say. You can sit next to
Come on in, Ben.
No,
Let me introduce you to my friend Jacob.
Oh, that's wonderful. No, I love what you said there, because I think maybe and I don't know, obviously I'm just speculating here, but John Vervaeke, Professor Red, I'm sure he's probably going through a similar thing right now because he has increased fame. Now, Jonathan Pageau's a little different because, well, he doesn't have that collegiate academic life. And so, but no, I know with John, I emailed him and his receptionist got back to me about doing an interview, and she said, he had been delighted, but he's just so damn busy.
Right.
And so, hopefully
that's what happens.
That's exactly what happens. Hopefully this video will make him have a conversation with me. So if you're watching, John Vervaeke, please have a conversation with me. It will be fun. You'll enjoy your time.
But that's
same with
the question of
Jonathan
scale. And a big, so there have been people around me that, for example, want me to have a handler. Okay. Paul,
okay.
You get inundated with requests for conversation. Why don't you have someone who decides for you who to talk to and who not to talk to? And part of the reason I keep the randos conversations and the channel open, even though I'm always getting complaints, there's no rando slots.
Yeah.
There are rando slots. They just get taken quickly. This is a question of size, but I want to keep open conversations with people that I am not cherry picking.
Got it.
Because that leaves me open to that helps eliminate the blind spots in my life and in the picture.
Thank you. I love it. And I think we should wrap this up now. The gist with Joe is going to be that, just the gist, right? So I would love to have you on for another half hour, 45 minutes. I feel like me and you could probably talk for a long time about a lot of different things. It seems like from the 2 hours that we've been talking, that's what I picked up on. So I do appreciate you, Paul. And I'm very excited to see where your work goes. And thanks for hopping on.
All right. Thank you, Joe.